Thank you so much for joining me, Jose. Before we get started, did you watch the fight yesterday?
No, which one?
Oh, you didn't watch the Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley fight? You don't watch MMA?
No, I usually do, but I didn't even, dude, my brain's been spacing. I had family in town for the weekend, so we didn't watch anything.
Well, that gets me started with what I wanted. So what I wanted to do with this interview, Jose, I've watched you so many times in different podcasts, or not podcasts, but in different shows, and usually commentating about bodybuilding or some parts of your life, but I never got a full story of your life picture. So I wanted to maybe in this interview shortly go through your life from the beginning. Particularly, so I'm curious, were you born in Boston?
Yes. I was the only one. I'm the youngest of 8.
Of 8?
Yeah.
Are your parents both Puerto Rican?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
100%. Yeah.
So are there a lot of Puerto Ricans in Boston?
Certain sections, there's plenty of them, but it's, so we can get into it, but I was adopted.
That's what I was going to ask you. Yeah.
Yeah. That's why a lot of people don't think I'm Puerto Rican. They think I'm Italian.
Exactly. I was going to ask about that. So were all your siblings adopted?
A good portion of them. There's a big span between me and the oldest. So the older siblings were pretty much on their own by the time I was born or adopted, you know?
That sounds like a really interesting story to begin with. I mean, usually parents who adopt kids are really giving and generous people. And it's really one of the things actually people don't talk about enough. One of the greatest things you can do in life. What's it like growing up adopted, not being genetically related to your parents? Especially, I guess your parents were Italian?
No, but the town I grew up in, it was mostly Irish and Italian.
Oh.
And so I took on a lot of the Italian mannerisms, the way I talk, and, my entire life. So wherever I go, people think I'm Italian.
So
I don't even speak Spanish. Yeah, I live about 20 minutes north of the city.
Oh, fascinating. Okay, I've just been watching movies about Boston for my whole life, so I know about like Southie and the North End and just stuff from movies. But it strikes me as a tough place to grow up in.
The inner city certainly was. I was blessed to be adopted in an affluent suburb north of the city. So there was no, I didn't have to worry about getting shot on the weekends or anything, stabbed in school or anything like that. I was very blessed.
I've read about there were times of originally apparently it was mostly Irish and Italian. And I guess in the 90s or 80s, there was this busing thing. So there was a lot of different integration and maybe sometimes racism there and stuff like that. You didn't experience that yourself.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Oh, there was, huh?
Yeah, I'm a little older than most of you guys, so I did experience some of it, for sure.
Yeah, it strikes me like it has a similar culture to like Northern England, like a very tough town, working class people, and sort of insular as well. But one of the other things about Boston is it's sort of like an academic mecca across the world. They have some of the best schools. How did that influence the environment that people grow up in Boston? Like, is Cambridge reachable? Does like University of Massachusetts and stuff, does that influence how people grow up in high school? Do they have better access to schooling and stuff like that? Or does it not?
Absolutely. There's a trickle down, the schooling throughout Massachusetts is a lot better than other areas of the country. There's definitely an effect in kids set their sights higher. Families set their sights higher. Harvard's right down the street. MIT, BU, BC, big, good schools. Holy Cross is only 45 minutes away. Yale is only an hour and a half away. It is, as you said, a educational mecca of the world.
I thought it might be a good place to grow up in because of that reason, but I didn't know how accessible it really was because my wife and I are looking for a new place to live in. I love Massachusetts, but the one thing that was concerning me is it's crazy expensive. Like it's another. Was it always like that?
It was always a bit more than the rest, but as the real estate bubble exploded worldwide, countrywide, of course, Massachusetts took the lead in being unreasonably expensive.
Interesting. Before we leave Massachusetts, one other thing I wanted to ask you about it, because you're the first person I've talked to from Boston. I wanted to know, is the opioid epidemic really overwhelming there? Has it really changed lives in the last 20 years?
100%. Yes. I've lost many friends that I grew up with, many friends that come from beautiful, stable, well-to-do families that, you know, sometimes that's a worse situation than the poor kids, because the wealthy kids could afford it. They could live their lifestyle and afford oxys. You know, they could bang through 3 oxy 80s a day with no problem and not miss a beat. And before you knew it, there were kids that live in $1 million homes ODing in Dunkin' Donuts bathroom on heroin, on a $12 bag of heroin. You know, so it was, I've seen it all, and it's very sad.
When did it start being so prevalent there? Just out of curiosity.
My friends started messing around in the late 90s with, you know, prior to that, early 90s, it was mostly marijuana, cocaine, booze, you know. As the late 90s started hitting in, you started getting more of the ecstasy and shit like that, and then the pills, the oxys, and then it just got out of control. Perks, all that, and eventually fentanyl. You know, there are a lot of accidental fentanyl deaths, but there are some where people knew it was fentanyl and using it on purpose. It's just it's a sad situation. I've lost a lot of friends.
Yeah, it's even affected us in the West Coast, although here opiate addiction is a little bit less prevalent, but it's starting to become quite prevalent. I used to live right next to downtown LA, and I would meet people that intentionally bought fentanyl and they switched over from heroin to fentanyl, which is just a crazy thing. But moving past, so did you go to, what were you like in high school? Who were you in high school? Were you a jock? Who'd you hang out with?
Yeah, 100%. I was a football player. I ended up playing football in college and wrestling in college. And, I was definitely a jock, but I was a party guy too. I was one of the guys, that was.
What did you study in college?
Exercise science.
Oh, so before you went into college, you already decided on weightlifting to some degree.
Oh yeah, for sure.
When did it hit you? When did you start weightlifting?
8 years old, 9 years old. Yeah.
What was the motivation? Was your family athletic, or was it for a personal reason?
Well, we were athletic. My older brothers were bigger, and we had just settled into a new foster family. And as we spoke of earlier, with there was racial tension in the town that I was growing up in. And I was hearing words that I never knew what even meant, spick and wetback and all this shit. And in the summers, I'm dark as hell with black, kinky, curly hair. I didn't look like anyone else. And it started getting to me. And I ended up getting in a lot of fights and a lot of behavioral issues. So our social worker brought us a weight set and a punching bag and was hoping there would be ways for us to burn off some steam. And then it just built, it grew into something that we had never planned on. We had the genetics. Our father was really big, and it was immediate. I mean, by 10 years old, I had big veiny forearms and big arms and big legs, and I was, at 12, I was 150 pounds of muscle. Wow! And yeah,
were you always short though at that age?
That was the same height I am now. I stopped growing by 12. Yeah.
Fast. So it's interesting. Like I often interview bodybuilders, and sometimes people get into bodybuilding for other reasons, but often it's to protect themselves, to build up like an armor or to get stronger. Like I just had William Bonac on the show last week, and William had a similar story of lifting actually to defend himself originally, which I think inspires a lot of different kinds of bodybuilders. But the other part of it is interesting, right? When you're a young man, most people think about how to change the outside world. Whereas this is sort of the reverse. You try to change yourself in response to the outside world.
Exactly.
It's pretty interesting. So was your brother, the brother you're talking about that was very gifted, is he the gentleman that lived in California that became a trainer?
Yep.
Oh,
yeah,
fantastic.
exactly. His name's Tito. He's still out there. He's been there over 22 years. He was amazing. He was a cover model through the 90s and early 2000s. You know, he placed second at the World Championships twice. He won the Team Universe 3 times. He won Muscle Mania on ESPN. He's been on 100 covers worldwide.
See, I heard you talk of him before, but I'd never seen his picture. And in researching this podcast, I saw he looks totally different than you.
He's a pretty boy.
He's a pretty boy. He looks very different. That's crazy.
He's 4 inches taller than me. He was always a real good-looking guy, and just a totally different physique. I was always short and stocky.
Now, he went to college with Chris Aceto. So was that while you were in college too? Did you meet Chris? Did you know him?
No. They went to Springfield College, and Chris is 6 years older than me, 6 or 7, and my brother's 5.5 years older than me.
Okay.
So I was in junior high when my brother first went off to college.
Were you already, when did you start competing in bodybuilding, like get on stage?
My first competition was 1993. I was 18.
Oh, so this is while you were in the first year of college or even in high school?
Yeah, I took a year off after high school before I went to college. I had to save some money, and I competed that year. My brother convinced me to do it, and I won in front of a packed house, and it was just a different feeling than any physical endeavor that I had experienced prior to that. And I knew that this was for me.
Did you have any aversion to like getting on stage with with the posing trunks and stuff like? Did you have that initially?
Yeah. I initially thought it was really strange, but I'd seen my brother doing it. My brother had started in '87 competing, and everything he did seemed to look cool to me. So I'm like, if he can do it and he makes it look cool, I can try it. And I did it. And like I said, it was no better feeling in the world because, I was not relying on anyone else. I didn't have a teammate, a quarterback, or even a coach. It was just me and my mental strength against these other guys. And we can get into that, but I always believe bodybuilding is 99% mental. And of course, the genetics play a huge role, but you can have all the genetics in the world. If you're mentally not there, then you're not going to reach your potential. And, that's proof with guys like Flex Wheeler. Tell me he shouldn't have had multiple Olympians. Or even Derek Lunsford by now. He should have won an Olympia by now. These, those are the roadblocks that are stopping people. And that's the mental, where I believe that I had inferior genetics to some people that I was beating on a regular basis because I was mentally strong. It didn't matter if I had 5 months to prepare or 5 weeks. I would be in shape the day of the show. And I made sure of it because I could mentally handle the beatdown I was about to put myself through.
I think that might be one of the things also that attract people to weightlifting in general is that you're not on a team. You don't have to, if you have any kind of social trust issues, you don't have to depend on that. You rely on yourself. And then for us, like in the strength world, you can see your numbers over time. You can see evidence of your change. And I guess in bodybuilding, you see it in the mirror. You can see evidence of your hard work. Right. So I think it's one of the best ways that people can work on themselves as well.
It's all very tangible evidence that you can see almost immediately.
Before we get into your career, can I ask you how, because were you 5'4" originally? You're 5'3.5" now, I've heard you say.
Yeah, I had a hip replacement and I, just through the years, I probably shrunk a little bit, but I've always been right there, just about 5'4", 5'3 3/4".
Yeah. Apparently people really do shrink. I went to the babies. I have a young baby. So I went to a doctor, a pediatrician recently, and they had a height measurement thing. So I went under the thing. I used to be 5'10". I don't appear to be anymore. I don't know how the hell that changed. It was specifically 178 centimeters, and now I'm like 176. I don't know if it was a bad day, but that scared the hell out of me. I didn't expect that at all. But what I was going to ask you is, because you're not like a little bit short. Like a lot of the people in 212 are 5'6" on average. Being 5'4", how does that influence everything in your life? Like approaching women, how people treat you, you know, is it different being 5'4" versus being like my average height, 5'9", 5'10"?
I suppose it could be if you allow it to be. I always thought I was the biggest guy in any room I entered. So it never affected me. I never had a problem with women. I never had a problem getting respect from other people in the room. I never, you know, people like to joke about height, but that's usually my friends. Usually the closer people are to me, the more likely they are to joke. But I never thought of height. The only time that my height was a disappointment to me was when it came time for recruiting in football, because I was a very good football player. And had I been 3 inches taller, 4 inches taller, the outcome of my football career may have been significantly different. So that's the only time it affected me.
How does it play into wrestling?
Not at all. I mean, the only reason I wasn't a phenomenal wrestler was I was too muscular. So I was really short in a heavy division. So I wrestled 177 in college, which is a really big guy. Yeah. Which is, you know, a guy 6'1" coming down from 220 to wrestle me. And, you know, they're like boa constrictors. Their arms and legs are much longer. They can wrap you up. But, you know, it has its advantages as well, you know, because I'm lower center of gravity. And I never lost on my feet. It was just once you got down to the mat, it was really difficult for me to get away from a guy with long arms and long legs. They basically suffocate you.
Yeah, in my sport, arm wrestling, it's similar. People with a longer arm can be really difficult for people with short arms, especially people that are stockier, and you end up with these giants in your division. Very similar. Yeah. So once you started competing, you seem to have won everything. Like you won the USAs multiple times in your division, the Nationals multiple times. Did you win the Universe also, I think?
Yeah, I won the Universe twice, and I won the overall 1 year. And 1 year I was in the overall with Kai Green.
Yeah, you went on a winning streak, really. That was. Yeah. Did you not get your pro card? Is the reason why you kept going into them because they gave the overall a pro card, or was it? What was? Because now they give the class division winner a pro card.
Yeah. So the rules were different back then. Like I won the USA in 3 different weight classes, but they didn't give a pro card unless you won the overall at the USA. I won nationals in 3 different weight classes, which would give me a pro card. But at the time, they didn't have a 202 or 212 division. And, you know, the first time I won, I was 153 pounds, and Ronnie Coleman was 275, and Jay Cutler was 265. You know, those guys were legit 100 pounds bigger than me. So I was like, well, why bother competing at the pro level when I can continue honing my craft and getting better? I was still young, and move up a weight division and grow and learn more about my body and learn more about the sport. And that's exactly what I did. So by the time I turned pro and started competing, I was immediately one of the best.
At the New York Pro?
That was my first pro show.
So
I didn't do too well in that show because I was still natural.
Oh, you were still natural at the New York Pro?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was 184 pounds.
Well,
and then 3 months later, 3 months later, I competed in the Atlantic City Pro at 202.
Oh, wow.
So I put on 16 or 18 pounds of stage weight in 3 months.
Now, so you did 2 unusual things. The first thing is that you competed repeatedly as a natural, which I need to understand how you were thinking about it and why. And the second thing is you didn't have a coach initially, I think, as well.
Yeah, I didn't until Chris Aceto, and I was 37 years old by the time I started with him.
So how old were you when you passed the natural barrier as well? Were you in your 30s?
I was 34 years old when I took my first steroid.
Okay, so this is really fascinating to me. So I want to know, first of all, what inspired you to compete in such difficult circumstances against people who are using all kinds of different kinds of drugs that you're not using? Was it a health concern? Did you not know people were using steroids? What was it?
It's a combination of all of that. My goal was to be the best natural bodybuilder in the world. And, my brother and I were a team. We trained together. We did everything together. And we were proud to be natural. That was our thing. We were, card carrying, flag waving natural bodybuilders. And I didn't need them to win. I didn't need them to beat guys at 154 pounds. I didn't need them to beat guys at 165. I didn't need them to beat guys at 176. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until we were over 200 pounds at 5'4" that, let's be realistic, every guy there was significantly bigger than me, because I went into 202 weighing 184. Wow. And that's when I realized, I can look damn good at 184, maybe even 190. But to play with the big boys, I got to change, I got to play by the rules. Mm-hmm. And I changed my strategy and I exploded.
Now, do you have, I'm curious to know your opinion on this, because like from what I read about, I like to read about academic papers on these hormones, like growth hormone especially. Mm-hmm. And growth hormone seems to work worse the older you are. So in the sense that when you're very young, a lot of your cells in your body can split. Whereas the older you get, less cells can split. So you get more like growth in the extremities as opposed to in the spine and so on. Do you think that starting your PED use later helped you or hurt you?
I think it definitely helped me.
How so?
Because I had already maxed out my natural potential. I had already known how to train. I knew how to eat. I knew every last aspect of my body in bodybuilding. Mm. I just didn't incorporate the pharmaceutical side of it yet. And once I did, I knew how to do it responsibly. I didn't have to abuse things. I wasn't an 18-year-old kid thinking I'd live forever and take 9 Anadrol a day and 3,000 milligrams of test. I was always, even after I wasn't natural anymore, I was still taking less than everyone else. And it's a fact. Chris would laugh at the things that people would say to me. Jose shoots his arms up. I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I would never.
I think it's because you're such a good responder to IGF-1 that you look like somebody who's using a lot of stuff. Like it's also about how your receptor is configured genetically, like I have a dysfunctional IGF-1 receptor. So if I take growth hormone, like I've tested it genetically. So if I take growth hormone, the growth hormone might cause me to lose body fat, but I won't get that 3D look that you guys get because my IGF-1 receptor is not responsive. I think yours was over responsive. So maybe that's the reason why you got those comments. But so basically you're saying that, and this makes obviously sense, that you spent years learning the hard way, the essentials of how to grow and how to diet and so on naturally. And this allowed you to use less steroids and to be more careful and to get the most out of what you used, right?
Exactly.
But do you ever notice that guys who are in their early 20s who started with the growth hormone seem to have that growth spurt in their early 20s that people don't have when they do it in their 30s? Do you notice that too?
Yeah, I think it's probably due to the fact that they haven't hit their ceiling yet. So they expand, they respond. It's not true for everyone. It's the select few that just like a Nick Walker that just morphs. Yeah. And I don't know the science behind that, but we can all assume what we want. There's definitely something to it, but I never took IGF-1. I never had access to that, like Increlex or anything like that. And I'm not sure I would have, because I was already at the top of my weight division, weight wise. So I just, the only thing that starting later hurt me was a shorter career. I spent 10 years. I did 10 Olympias. I was in the first call out every year. But had I started, at 28, I might have had a Dexter Jackson type of career, or even earlier. Who knows?
Very interesting. Now, about Chris Aceto, he was your first coach too. He's the first guy you reached out to.
So one coach reached out to me. I let him help me, and he wasn't helping me. He was kind of doing everything that went against what I had known to work for me previously. And we can get into that as well, where, I tried to tell him over and over again, I'm a fat kid at heart. I need a lot of cardio, and I can't have a lot of carbs. And he'd be like, okay, 10 minutes cardio and 500 gram carb. And I'm like, no, that don't work for me. So I didn't really listen to him. And I won the Tampa Pro. And then I said, listen, I'm going to just do my own thing for the next show. And I get an interview. I won the show a week later, and someone's interviewing me, and he butts in. He goes, what do your guru say? Say 2 hours cardio. And I'm like, I looked at him, and I was like, I never want to speak to this guy again. And then it was another 2 years before I actually, had a sit down with Chris Aceto, and we agreed to work together. And then things really changed.
Well, before we leave the cardio subject, so I've always been curious about this. I don't understand, if you're a bodybuilder in the off season, why don't you eat less and do less cardio? Does it change your body? Is it better to eat more and do more cardio?
In the off season?
Yeah, in the off season, not pre-contest.
Well, my own personal belief is that your heart never takes a break. So in the off season, if you're putting on 30, 40, 50 pounds and not at least exercising and trying to keep your heart strong, then you're compounding the damage to yourself.
Yeah.
So I always believed in continuously doing cardio, contest prep or off season. I would rather eat more and do cardio.
Yeah, of course.
I just would, because I think your body is still getting an effect from the extra nutrition.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas if you're just starving yourself, you're more likely to lose muscle that way.
That's what I think too. I've been thinking that the reason people like Ronnie did an hour or 2 hours of cardio in the off season is the food is a signaling molecule. It turns on IGF-1. It does other things like that. Even if you burn off the calories, you still get that signaling for growth. That was my theory for it. But so Chris Aceto has a very mysterious style of coaching. I wanted to ask you about it because I have great respect for him. And whenever I hear people, we've had someone on the show who was his client recently, they say that he's not very particular about what, he'll say, what do you have? What kind of foods do you have? And just suggest. So he goes sort of ad hoc and on the spur of the moment and with his inspiration. What's it like being coached by someone like that? I guess he doesn't give you a plan in the beginning, right? It's as you go kind of thing.
Chris and I are a lot alike. So that's why we clicked so well, is that he didn't need to, I was already 16 years into my career when I met him. And I didn't need him to explain to me that I can have jasmine rice as opposed to red potato. I didn't need that. I don't need that at all. If he says have an apple, I don't ask him if it's a sliced apple or should I skin it. It's very simple. So we really understood each other from the get-go. And he's not very particular with certain things, but other things he is particular. He stays on top of you. There were times he wanted pictures 3 times a day. As soon as I woke up, as soon as I got a pump, and then at night after a meal. He's very, very involved, and he's also one of those people. He's only as involved as you're willing to commit. If you're a guy, he says, I want pictures Wednesday morning, and you get pictures Friday, he's like, okay. I told you Wednesday, obviously you're not taking this serious, so I'm going to take it as serious as you are. And, with me, I never missed a beat, and the pictures were early. They were consistent, and he knew that this meant the world to me. So he gave me the world of his time. As someone who has 4 kids and a wife and a real business and, 50 other people he's helping, but he made it seem as though I was the only competitor on earth that he truly cared about. And that's what meant the world to me, and he believed in me as much as I believed in myself. And, that's huge.
He has so many people commend him. I wonder how he has so many hours in the day, because everybody says that. The people who contact him a lot said he's very responsive. But I imagine he must have 30 hours in his day, because he does more than anybody else seems to.
I don't know. He don't sleep very much, I'll tell you that.
One last question about him. I just recently learned, a lot of my listeners and myself are Muslims. I recently learned that Chris is Muslim. Is that true?
Yeah, he has been for a long time. I'd say probably 30 years.
Wow, that's so surprising. I never knew at all. I had heard some podcast he was on, and his phone, some of the Muslims, we have an app on our phone to tell us when it's time to pray. So his app goes off, and I'm like, whoa, this guy prays. He's really Muslim. It's really surprising and cool. So I wanted to ask you a couple of things about your competitions. Actually, maybe we could start with a couple of early things. First of all, you competed against David Henry, who I think was the first winner of the 202. What was it like competing against this guy who had like a perfect upper body? Really, he was it seemed
insane. In fact, my first pro show, which was the New York Pro, watching him weigh in played a lot in my decision to change things up, because he took his shirt off and his shoulder, his delt, like fell. It was like a breast. It was so big and heavy. And I was just mind blown, and I'm a fan of the sport first, so I could be backstage and just looking at these guys like, oh my God, why? I can't believe they look like this, and he was amazing. We were cool almost right out of the gate. At first, David's kind of quiet, almost shy, so you don't know what to make of him. But once you get to know him, he is an absolute diamond, like a great, solid dude in every aspect of his life. And his physique was just crazy. I remember him as an amateur. I remember, just how wacky looking he was.
Yeah.
And I competed against him as an amateur, I believe. And the 203 USA. I think it was me, Stan McQuay, David Henry, my brother, and another guy, Garrett Allen. The top 5 were all pros, except for my brother. He was the only one who didn't turn pro.
Fascinating. Now, how many times did he win how many years did they do the 202 before it went to 212? And did he win all those years?
No, he won the first one, then Kevin English won 3 of them, and then they moved the weight class up to 212.
How did the weight class moving up affect you, being that you're one of the shorter people in the division?
Yeah, it sucked because I was just hitting my stride. And the year before, I had just beat Flex Lewis at 202.
Oh.
I beat him at the New York Pro. And he's 3.5 inches taller than me. And it was a different look. I could max out 202 and look phenomenal, where Flex looked phenomenal, but he was not anywhere near his potential. It was like he looked almost thin. It was small for him at 202, where I could still look big and full at 202. And once they moved the division, the weight up 10 pounds, I say to this day, they moved it up for him. because he was the face of the division. He was young. He was young, white, handsome, and charismatic, and he was the star that division was made for. And I say to this day, if they didn't move it up to 212, I might have had 7 Olympia championships.
Well, I got to tell you, Jose, I don't know much about what I'm talking about, but I feel like the 202 should have never been moved to 212, because the only reason I say this is because the average height now, if you look at the men's open, not the average, but the most common height is probably 5'8". So, or 5'7" sometimes, if you think about like Rowley, William Bonac, and so on. So they're really close in height to the taller 212 guys. Whereas if it was 202, it would really be a shorter class. You know what I mean?
I agree 100%. I wish
now it's become like a
changed.
stepping stone in a sense, where a lot of people will go in there and then go to the men's open and compete there. It shouldn't be like that. I think it should be for people that couldn't maybe compete as well in the men's open. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what it was originally for, because the Pro League was losing a lot of phenomenal bodybuilders that were lightweight, middleweights, light heavyweights. Now the majority of 202 competitors are heavyweights, just smaller heavyweights, 210-pound heavyweights, 215-pound heavyweights that come down to 212,
Exactly.
It definitely shouldn't have changed. The only thing I can say that was a good thing about it going to 212 is that Flex spearheaded the whole movement, and he helped bring so much attention to the division that it is hugely successful. Now the smaller guys have something to look forward to. Mm-hmm. It's like a whole new thing, where if it were 202, it may not have gained as much steam. It may have switched hands over and over again. It may, we don't know. Where Flex was that amazing star that a flourishing division needs to get as popular as it did.
Now, every year you were neck. I don't know what the phrase is, neck to neck with Flex. Yeah. It reminds me, it's interesting because Chris was also on your side. It reminds me sort of Chris and Jay when Ronnie was dominating. I wonder if you could give us like a perspective of what was it like every year when you would almost get there, and you and Chris, would you guys go back to the drawing board? Or would you have a strategy for the next year? Or, I mean, how could you? Because you were so filled with muscle, you were at the peak of the division. But what were you guys thinking when you'd prepare for the next year?
Well, it was very similar to Jay and Ronnie in many ways. One being that Chris thought Jay won every time, and he thought I beat Flex every time. It was apples and oranges, very different physiques, both Ronnie and Jay and me and Flex. And when you really look at the ins and outs of it and what bodybuilding is judged upon, you could make an argument that I beat him numerous times, not just in the Olympia, but in the shows afterwards. When we'd go on a tour and go to Korea, go to Prague, there were many times where it was, you could flip a coin, but, it's like, how do you win the Olympia and then 7 days later lose in Korea? There's no judge on earth who's going to do that.
That was to Hadi, right?
Right. That's another one he could have lost, Both me and Hadi on that day were damn near our best. Yeah. And Flex wasn't at his best. So you could certainly make an argument, but there's no judge on earth that's going to do that. It's going to take the Olympia winner and put him third in the show a week later. It's just not going to happen. So Chris definitely had some frustrating times. We still talk today, 6 years later after the 2015 Olympia, where he thought that I should have won. He'll send me comparison pictures, just to bust my balls.
Is that what gets you fired up about a comeback? Because Flex is no longer in that division? And
No, I just love competing. One,
No, I mean,
if I
yeah,
were to
of
come
course.
back, it would be because I love to compete, and
But what
everyone
I
that's
mean to say is just for the audience to know, because I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but you suffered an injury, and that's the main reason you had to stop competing. But it happened
exactly,
to be just when Flex was also leaving the division.
yeah,
So
same here.
it seemed like a horrible timing, you know. If it had been
Yeah,
like a couple of years later, I think you would have gotten at least the first one afterwards.
yeah.
Do you think about
Well,
that?
I don't. I can't think of it in ways like that because it was time anyway. I'm 9 years older than Flex.
Why?
You know, it was time for me to go. I had outworn my welcome, and it was time. I would only compete because I love it, not because I thought I could go and beat Kamal or beat Sean or anything like that. It would be because I love to compete. I love being there with the fans and the other competitors, and my time is gone. My best time was between 2013 and 2015, and I peaked at 2015. And then injuries started happening. In 2016, I had 40 cc's of fluid drained out of my knee 3 days before the Arnold Classic, and I
Oh my
placed
God.
second to Hide.
You had a
Then
knee thing too?
then I had my knee scoped 2 days after the Arnold,
Oh
and then
wow.
I went and placed third at the Olympia that year. And then I just started limping more and more. My hips started killing me. So I ended up retiring and having a hip replacement 3 months later.
Before I ask you about that, can I ask you about one last thing about the competition season? So, as because of your height and having a short torso like I do, over time, I think as you gain muscle, your midsection became a point of critique. I wouldn't say you
Yep.
had a distended midsection myself, but people were mentioning it, I guess, sometimes. I didn't really see it, to be honest with you, but I'm just curious. Did you try to do something about that? Because it's interesting, like Rolly had a similar thing, and then his midsection shrunk. And
Mhm.
so there are some things people do, which we don't know what they are, I guess.
Yeah.
But did you guys think of any approaches to that?
So here's the thing, the bigger you get, yes, the bigger things are. When I hit a pose, I could pull a vacuum.
Yeah.
There was no sign of any distension.
Absolutely.
It was just when I was off to the side or in between poses, if I would breathe, if I was lazy for even a split second, it was clear and you could see that my stomach would pop out. And, today's very different than 1978, 1988, when the only photos taken were shots while you're in the pose. Now everyone's looking for that pose when you're off to the side breathing so they can post it. And so, yeah, they caught me in a couple bad shots. Never in the pose, never
Nice.
on stage. My waist might have been not as tight as someone else next to me, but I was also a lot bigger than them. So there's a fine line. I was able to do as well as I did, even with a little distension, because I had other qualities that blew other guys away. If the worst thing I had was a little bit of distension when I'm in between poses, then, I'm not too worried about it. I was never worried about it because when I'd practice my posing, it never was a bad issue. There was one particular picture when Arnold was handing me the trophy and I was just free breathing and my stomach was sticking out pretty bad. And people are like, that's so unprofessional. You should be in a vacuum the entire time you're on stage. I'm like, no, man, I just won the second biggest show in the world. I was breathing. Excuse me, I don't listen to people. I don't care. If they want to talk about it, I'll talk about it. But nobody's perfect. When it's all said and done, I had a pretty damn good career with a big blown out stomach or not.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't blown out. I was just curious because I was trying to know, like, when people get that criticism, do they like decide, hey, I'm not going to work out my abs? Because the reason why I've been thinking about that is other people have been commenting on this, but I've noticed for a while, last few years, bodybuilders tend to have seemingly less developed abs, or like sometimes the muscle won't be as big. So I was thinking maybe people are avoiding those workouts to keep the core smaller or something like that. I was just wondering what their thoughts were on the subject.
No, I trained abs 3 days a week my whole life. And I had really good abs, really hard, thick abs. I have a thick abdominal wall. So even if it wasn't distended, it was sticking out a little bit, because I had thick abs to begin with. Obviously, the bigger I got, the more I use this analogy all the time. I was 10 pounds of shit stuffed in a 5-pound bag. So there was stuff popping out everywhere, but it didn't hold me back. It wasn't, I could pull a vacuum. I practice vacuums every day.
I was going to ask you, how often did you practice those? Because you were one of the best vacuum doers. Oh, really?
Every day. Yeah. And, my quarter turns were perfect. My waist was never an issue while hitting a pose. You just can't mimic what the judges do to you sometimes, particularly if it's going to be close between me, Eduardo, and Flex, or me and Flex, and me and whoever else. And now you're up there for 8 to 10 minutes posing. You're damn right you're breathing. And, it happens. But I was always aware of it. And that's one thing, like, I'm a critic of bodybuilding myself. I'm a fan of bodybuilding myself. There's nothing you see about my physique that I haven't already seen and that I haven't already addressed. But there's a give and take. There's, for me to have all the other qualities that I did have. I mean, I was pound for pound the biggest guy at that time. So, yeah, my stomach was going to be a little thicker than someone else, but so were my legs, so were my arms, so was my back.
Aren't you pound for pound the biggest bodybuilder in the last 10 years or 20 years? Only maybe Sean is the only competitor, Sean Clarida? Because for height, I think you might be. I was just thinking about it. I don't know anyone.
Definitely one of the bigger guys.
Yeah, one of the biggest short guys in history, I think. Yeah, that's very true. So can I ask you about the hip surgery? Because I have issues with my hip too, I think from squatting when I was younger. Now, I know your brother had the same surgery. So I'm wondering if it's a genetic thing about your joint, you think?
Yeah, my doctor said 100%. He said, when you're born, you're in fetal position and you eventually unravel. He's like, you never fully unraveled. So your femurs were always slightly internally rotated, which caused some shearing. He said you would have needed a hip replacement by 60 anyway. It's not from bodybuilding. It's not from sports. It's a genetic thing. And he said you just sped up the process from all the different activities throughout your life.
Well, I'm glad you told me that, because I've been noticing my daughter keeps her legs inwards, and I've been wondering about that. Oh, that's so you just maybe sped it up because you're a heavy squatter too.
Yeah. Squats and years of football, being tackled, running, sprinting, wrestling. Everything I did contributed to the deterioration of the cartilage. It was severe arthritis. It was bone on bone. My shoulders are now bone on bone. It's just a thing that happened.
But the thing about the shoulders is that the replacement doesn't really work so well. The hip replacement is like pretty durable, right?
Yeah.
So you can lift properly with your hip.
Oh yeah, I love it. It's amazing.
Whereas if you had a shoulder replacement, it's a certain period of time before it wears down, right?
Yeah, that's why I'm delaying it as long as possible. I'm still able to train and pretty much do everything. I just can't go heavy like I used to, and it's really no need for me to anymore. It's painful, but I'm able to get by, and I'm going to try to get by as long as I can. Just like the hip surgery, it used to be that you might have to have multiple hip surgeries, and I want to wait until they perfect the shoulder replacement, or wait as long as I can. With the hip, I couldn't sleep anymore. There was pain running down my shin. I couldn't get in and out of my car anymore. and it was unbearable. And that's when I decided I'm getting it done. They had told me a year prior that I needed it. And I said, well, I already committed to all these shows. He said, good luck. Come back when you're ready. And so a year later, I came back and had it done.
So you went through a year of crazy pain as well.
Yeah. I went through 2 years of limping and then a year of really I couldn't stand it anymore. Yeah.
Do you need the other one as well, you said?
Yeah.
Ah.
And I'm just kind of going with the same approach with that is I'm going to ride it until I can't take anymore. And I should have done them both at the same time.
I know. I was wondering why you didn't. Some people do that.
Because it wasn't hurting. It wasn't bothering me at all. And I didn't know until they were in there that the doctor was like, they x-ray you to see how everything's going. And then as they were doing my left hip, they x-rayed my right hip. And he said, you need the other one done for sure.
That's not nice to hear.
No, it wasn't. I figured. But I'll give it another year or so.
I've long noticed that it seems like most people seem to develop shoulder issues eventually. Like I don't think that overhead pressing we're really made for it. Eventually, I mean that the shoulder is just such a dynamic joint. I feel like it has so many opportunities to get messed up. But moving past this, I wanted to ask you about your views of what's going on in the division now. So first of all, is Derek Lunsford too big for even the 212 division? Which the 202, I'm sure he wouldn't have been competing in. But do you think he's too big for the 212 division? Do you think it's better for his career to go to open?
Yes. I think he could still slide in and pull off a win this year. I think with Hani in his corner, I think they can pull it off. It will not be the best version of Derek that we'll see, but I think he could be good enough to win this year. And then after this year, I would move on immediately because he's still so young and growing and growing and growing, and his body wants to explode. And just, I think Derek is good enough with his structure to win the Open Olympia. I think he's that good. I think he could. And I think he'd be selling himself short if he continues to try to be the 212 Olympia. You know, put it this way, Hadi has placed second at the Olympia. And I think Derek has a better structure than Hadi.
He's placed third, hasn't he?
Who?
Hadi.
Oh,
Bonak, you mean?
No, I meant Hadi. He placed second at last year's finals. He was second.
Oh, in the finals, yeah. He got third.
The year before, he was fourth.
Yeah. If he showed up last year like he was at the finals, I think he's underlooked generally. You know. Yeah. But can I ask you about that? Because you've competed against Bonak as well, right?
I beat him.
So this is what I want to ask you. Are they like what Derek is? Like were they too big for the class too, or were they doing well in it?
Yes, they were both awesome. Hadi could have won the 212 Olympia if he was able to do it. And Bonak, same thing. He was flat. So he wasn't able to reach that look that he has now. He still looked crazy. His arms were crazy. His legs were crazy. His glutes were crazy, striated. But the middle part of him, like the back, wasn't as full because he was, he had to make weight. His pecs weren't as heavy and round. And now he's at his potential. And he looks, but he looked phenomenal back then. And he was severely overlooked in most of the competitions. Really? Because he came out of nowhere. He was from Holland. He was, didn't really know him. He had his hair up in the crazy, nobody knew him. Yeah. Oftentimes it's a name game. Like, yeah, this guy looks great, but he's not going to get a call out next to, these guys we already know. I think he was overlooked tremendously a few times. And it was the smartest thing he ever did was to move on. He's another one who was a heavyweight. He turned pro at like 215 and then came down to, I thought it was 202. He might have done 202 for a year. Then he did the 212 in England which was one of the greatest lineups ever. It was Flex Lewis, Sami Al-Haddad, myself, Eduardo Correa, William Bonac. That was the top 5 right there.
Wow.
Yeah. And he's just meant for it. Just like I think Derek is definitely meant for the Open.
Was Kamal a threat to you guys when you used to compete? Do you think Kamal would have won a Mr. Olympia if you were still, let's say, competing?
Well, at my peak, I think I would have beat him. I think I was just too big for him and hard. But he beat me at the what was it? The 2018 Arnold Classic.
Oh, really?
And then he beat me at the 2018 Olympia.
Oh, I didn't realize
which
that.
was my last year. That's when I was already done, basically. But yeah, Kamal is so polished and so
he has
put
nothing
together.
Missing. Yeah,
nothing missing. Always conditioned. Great presentation. Amazing skin. He's got it all. And a lot of people never heard of him, but he is one of the greatest bodybuilders that ever lived. Ever. His record, the amount of shows that he's won between world championships, Asian championships, European championships, Arnold Classics, he's won everything.
Yeah.
And I had heard of him a few years prior because Chris Aceto was helping him. He had done a show over in England, like a PCA championships. And Chris kept talking about him. This guy's unbelievable. Mm-hmm. He had asked him years ago. Chris had met him 20 years ago.
Oh, no.
And told him that he wanted him to help him. And it took that long for him to be able to do it.
Yeah, he's one of those guys that really did compete in the amateurs, like everybody says about people in the Middle East. I didn't really know it really happened. I mean, I used to live in Dubai and I used to meet like amateur bodybuilders there that were, when you see them in person, you think these guys are pros. Huge people, 3D muscle. You never heard of them before. But it turns out, I guess, they really do just compete in amateur shows repeatedly. And I guess Kamal was one of those guys for years and years, right? Yeah,
because they made a lot of money doing it. So Kamal was representing Qatar.
Yeah, I read it.
And he was being paid handsomely. And the same thing with Sami Al-Haddad. He was representing Bahrain. Oh. And he was getting houses and cars and money and motorcycles, all to remain amateur and represent those countries. So it didn't make sense for them to turn pro and lose these sponsorships.
I don't know why would why would the countries not want these guys to compete at the Mr. Olympia? You would assume it's more prestigious for them, even though it's not an amateur.
Because they have a lot of pride in the world championships. They go as a team. They send the whole team, and it's a very prideful thing there. I've competed in the world championships, and they are very, very proud of their team. They come with their flags, and it's a pretty in-depth, special event. I did the world championships in China in 2005. Oh, wow. And that's when, do you remember Baitola Abbaspor?
Yes, of course.
From Iran. He passed away. Yeah. He and I did the welterweight division together back then in 2005.
Wow.
And he looked at me backstage and he knew he'd already seen me in magazines. And he gave me like this, like it's going to be me and you. and then we didn't have a delegate on the judging panel. I was nuts. I was in crazy condition. I easily could have been top 2. I ended up placing 8th. They wouldn't compare me. They wouldn't put me out next. And he would just look at me like, I don't know what happened. But he ended up placing 3rd. He probably should have won. And I ended up placing 8th.
This was some bad judging at this show, apparently. But
the World Championships is I learned a lot. When you said, when you decided to go a different route, what was it? That played a huge role as well, because I went to the World Championships thinking, this is all natural World Championships. They drug test. I get there and a 250-pound Dennis Wolf won the overall. And I'm looking at all the guys around me. I'm like, this is nuts. There's no way. So it really just opened my eyes. It wasn't a good or a bad thing, but I was a bit naive at the beginning of my career.
You're the opposite of what most guys are like in my generation. Most guys in my generation, when they see somebody who also is natural, will think, nah, that guy's on drugs. Whereas you were the opposite. You thought nobody was on drugs until the very end.
Exactly.
That's crazy.
Until I saw them.
Was Beytallah, I think he must have been the first well-known Iranian bodybuilder. I think before Hadi. I think he must be the first historically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially in modern day. You know?
Yeah. So,
sure.
So do you think that Kamal, I heard an interview of Kamal, it's actually on Dennis James's channel, which I'm a big fan of. And Kamal was saying that he didn't complain, but you could see that he was at a loss for words about losing last year because he improved between the 2 years visibly. But Sean Clarida is a freak of nature. I don't know how this guy came out and still beat him. Do you think that Kamal has a chance to win if Sean maintains his conditioning and size? Do you think anyone has a chance to beat Sean except Derek Lunsford?
I think,
and that includes Keon also, which is future, and George Peterson.
I don't think anyone's really going to beat Sean, not because of his physique, but because he's so locked in. He is so locked in mentally. Remember, we spoke about that earlier, about the mental aspects of it. Mm-hmm. Sean is not going to allow himself to be beat. All he needs to do is repeat what he did last year. If he's even 0.5% better, he cannot be beat. Mm-hmm. It's just too much of everything. Mm-hmm. Now, and that's why I think that Derek could, if he could pull a rabbit out of his hat and pull off a miracle, which would allow him to be big because he's so much bigger than Sean and just as hard, then there could be problems. But I don't think Kamal...
Is anyone as hard as Sean Clarida, though? I mean, that condition is like...
Just Hadi.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
Yeah. I don't think Kamal can be, and there's no disrespect to Kamal, I love him, but at this age, he's older than me, and to make improvements on his legs, which is what he would have to do to beat Sean, is very, very rare, if not impossible. At 49, 50 years old, to make his legs better, where Sean's are getting better daily. Sean's legs are just out of this world now. So that's why I don't think he could. And he made huge improvements from the year before and still wasn't able to beat him. I would be very upset if I was Kamal. And, you're the reigning, returning, defending champion, and you get better and lose. It's very frustrating. So I don't blame him for being agitated by that. But at the same time, Sean also made huge gains, improvements, and I just think it's his time. The only person I see beating him would be Derek, because Keon, as much as I love his physique, he's not there yet. He's not seasoned. He doesn't have the muscle. I think Clarida's 10 years older than him, has much more mature muscle. And it just looks different when you look at them side by side on stage. Keon certainly has a better silhouette, but he doesn't have near the hard, grainy muscle yet.
But he might be the future, you think, of the division?
Absolutely. 100%. I would be astonished if Keon doesn't win the Olympia within 2 years.
Wow. That's a bold prediction.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it is. Because here's my thing. If Sean wins this year, then Derek's moving on. Derek will go to the Open. And that would give only Keon is the only one that can match Clarida in structure and muscle. All he has to do is match him in condition. And with an extra year, a year or two of conditioning, seasoning, he could win it. But I don't see anyone else.
That's very interesting. So I wanted to ask you, when are we going to see you back on? Before we finish, I want to know, when are we going to see you back on stage? Because you've been hinting about it for a year. It must be a year or so. Because you never officially retired. You just said you're stopping because of the hip stuff.
Yeah,
and I know you're training.
Stopping competing. I train regularly. There's a very, very low likelihood of me ever getting back on stage. I have too many injuries now, and it's not just my hips; it's my shoulders. I can train, but I can't pose. I can't reach my arms back in order to do a front double bicep anymore.
You know why I noticed this on recently? Nathan Dasha at the Europa had the same thing. He couldn't move fully. Is there any way to deal with that? Can you get that range of motion back?
Depending on what's causing it. You know, mine is I have a bone spur in my left shoulder. It's pretty big, and it stops my arm from going back. And you know, so you have tightness in there. Your shoulder does what's called guarding to help the injury. It just locks everything up. And I would need tons of therapy to even get close to the range of motion I need. And just over time, I'm losing muscle every minute that I'm not training the way I used to train to get there. So I'm realistically, I would never come back to place top 10. You know, that's not my goal. I want to be fit. I want to be in shape. I want to help other people. I want to inspire other people and be the best I can be. But my days of being on the Olympia stage are long since gone.
Well, speaking of that, why don't you post often on YouTube? Because I'm a subscriber of yours. You guys used to post with your buddy that's your former client, forgetting his name.
Nate.
You guys used to post more often, and then the posting just decreases, and you can't do that. You know, the channel will just die. You have to do. We all want to see videos from you, but I feel like you're lazy to do them by yourself. Like you need a co-host or something like that because you don't.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, Nate's really busy. He's just started a new business, and you know, we keep saying we want to do it, we'll do it, but it's just one of those things. It was never like a main source of income or anything for me. It was just something fun that I like to do, and you know, we'll definitely still do something. But I don't know. It's kind of strange, the whole social media thing. I love doing this, sitting and talking to you and doing an interview. It's a genuine thing. But for me to spout off every day and throw my opinion out there like I actually matter is kind of, I feel it's a little pompous. And I don't want to, I don't like seeing it. Put it that way. Like when I watch Nick Power and Strength and he's a young kid. He doesn't know everything he's talking about. Oftentimes he's wrong at some of the things he's saying. And I shake my head and I'm like, what is this kid doing? He's fuck. This is what he's doing. He's making $50,000 a month off of YouTube. This is crazy.
That's a good estimate. Yeah.
Yeah. I bet he is. And you know, I don't know. I could come up with excuses all day long.
So everybody has that. So I had that feeling in my own little way. Like what my channel is about is mostly health stuff. So sometimes, for example, so I could make a video. My original videos also always used to be informative videos. Like for example, today I had a video that came out about why airplane rides may cause inflammation in people. These videos don't get much traction. So what I could do, for example, is make a video responding to another channel's video on a certain topic. That gets more traction, but I don't want to do that because I feel like a phony or I feel like I'm doing something weird doing that because you're doing it intentionally just to get traction. So I think that's the aspect of it that you don't like I
hate it.
You know, we all have to deal with it though. That unfortunately, that's how YouTube works.
A lot of like Greg Doucette stuff because I know Greg and I competed with him and he's really nice and he had a hip replacement as well. So when I was going through it, he gave me a lot of good advice but then like it seemed like every video he did was shitting on someone else or talking about someone shitting on him, and I can't do that. I don't have that. I don't like that. I don't want to sit and bicker back and forth with people.
The classic video that people talk about is the kind of natty or not videos where you just
I hate it.
Predict what somebody's on, that kind of stuff. Exactly. I know what you mean. But I think there's a way to do it that's like genuine. But I think all we need to do is get you more technologically, because you can do like short 5-minute videos every day, just a thought or whatever. But the thing with YouTube, if you don't post frequently, it downregulates your channel. So when you do post, people don't see it. But the reason why I'm saying all this is because I watched one of your interviews this morning, the one with Jay, and you're a phenomenal interviewer. I really think you could do that, like sort of what I do with these kind of
yeah. Well, like I said, I enjoy the conversation, particularly if I have a relationship with the person and they're comfortable with me. Then we have a good time doing it, just like two buddies talking. And oftentimes we get things out of them that someone else might not.
Exactly.
I had a great interview with Nick Walker. If you ever have a chance to go look at that one, it's pretty deep. He goes really deep. And, we had a similar experience growing up where it was just, I was amazed and I wasn't expecting it. And, I do enjoy that, but there's only so much of that you can do. And then you reach out to people. A lot of people don't even respond. People who are your friends.
That's true.
Like, oh man, if I do it with you, I got to do it with everyone. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry has a channel. I'm like, all right.
That's the worst.
So listen, I have a question for you. Because you do this health stuff, I told a friend of mine that I was going to be on here, and he's experiencing severe kidney issues. And he wanted me to ask you, because I'm not the kidney guy to ask. But he said he's been using anabolics for the past 20 years. He's 52 years old. His creatinine levels are at 3.2. How common is this, and what would be your recommendation to fight it? He looks like $1 million. He's in great shape, but his numbers have been pretty bad for a while now. He has his father was diabetic and on dialysis for many years until he finally passed. And he's petrified right now and doesn't know what to look for, how to address this. What would be your quickest answer?
So first of all, I'm not a doctor, and this is not medical advice, and I'm also not an expert on kidneys, but I've been reading a lot about how anabolics affect kidneys, so maybe I can offer some notes. The first thing is, a lot of us think that the blood pressure is the reason why the kidneys are failing on people. That is one reason, blood pressure, dehydration, but it turns out that androgen signaling itself causes what's called hypertrophy in the kidney glomeruli, which produces this thing called glomerular sclerosis, which is like what Fuad has, what Boston has, which is common in bodybuilding. It's a scarring of the kidney. So I just want to let people know, if you have high androgen levels, even if your blood pressure is controlled, your kidneys will deteriorate faster. And that seems to be why men experience kidney damage faster than women. The second thing is about his numbers. A lot of people, by the time they reach their 50s, are actually in one stage of chronic kidney disease already. I'm talking about non-lifters. Just regular people tend to be in, there are 4 stages. They tend to be in one or the second stage by 50 or 60, a lot of people. About testing his kidney, what he should do is not just rely on the creatinine, although maybe it is indicative. As you know, I'm sure creatinine is inflated when you're muscular. So there are 2 other metrics he should triangulate it with. The other 2 are cystatin C, that's cystatin for the audience. And the second is symmetric dimethylarginine, which is SDMA. He can have his estimated glomerular filtration rates, that's the EGFR, which they calculate, which is sort of an estimate of how much your kidney is filtering. He can have that tested with creatinine or with cystatin C. So he can do both, so he can get a good picture. Then he can test the symmetric dimethylarginine as another indicator. All 3 will give him a pretty good perspective of how his kidneys are functioning. The next thing to do is, and I've done this recently, is to get an ultrasound of your kidney. It's very quick. It's easy to ask a doctor to do this. Your general doctor can do it. If he just mentions that his father died of kidney disease, there'll be enough reason for insurance to cover it. And an ultrasound actually is pretty cheap overall. What is really most important is your radiologist, how good they are at using the ultrasound machine as well as reading the scans. But you want to see if there's scarring there. If there's scarring, that's the beginning of that disease that a lot of people get. In addition to this, the only two drugs known to slow down the progression of chronic kidney disease are blood pressure medications. And there's a new class of drugs that are 2 or 3 years old. Well, they're actually like 8 years old, but they became famous recently. They're called SGLT2 inhibitors. The one I use is called empagliflozin, 25 milligrams. You can start with 10 milligrams initially under the care of a doctor. What these do is they make you basically, your kidneys pull out glucose from your bloodstream as well as salt. And it's called a sodium glucose cotransporter. What these drugs do is make your kidneys excrete some of the salt. So you basically, and the glucose. So you hold less glucose and salt in your bloodstream. It's basically a small diuretic effect. Originally, when these medications came out, they thought that they may damage kidneys, but they were surprised to find out that not only diabetics, but even non-diabetics with chronic kidney disease, the progression was slowed down with these medications. Other than this, there's a lot of supplements you can use to reduce oxidative stress in the body. The more oxidative stress you have, the more inflammation you have, the more your kidneys get damaged quicker. But there's so many of them. There's like too many to list. But I'm no expert on the subject, but I'd love to talk to your friend if he needs any, just general advice.
Yeah, he's scared because his doctors, as you know, they don't get very specific with them. As soon as they hear that he's used anabolics, they're like, "Oh, you're the devil. You're gonna die,"
Yeah.
And from some of the numbers, the filtration numbers that you were talking about, I think his doctor said, he asked him to give him an estimate, like, can you give me an estimate at what percent my kidneys are functioning? And he said, "Oh, I would have to guess somewhere around 30%." And he's petrified right now, and if you saw him, you'd be like, this guy looks like $1 million.
So once he listens to this, he should get those 2 other tests, or just go straight to the kidney ultrasound. Ignore what the hell the doctor's saying. If you get the kidney ultrasound, you can see if there's scarring or not. If there is, you can see how much it is. You can get on those 2 protective medications, to slow it down, blood pressure medication and SGLT2 inhibitor. And I think it's much better once he gets a picture of the kidney and does those 3 other tests. Because like Boston has been going to doctors, and he has he's not going to the doctor I'm asking him to go to. There's a Mayo Clinic in Florida, in Jacksonville, that is like, they're specialists in kidney disease, close to him, but he doesn't want to drive there. So he goes to a different doctor. But his doctor's horrible. His original doctor was horrible. Barely felt any urgency. When someone's in a case like that, they could have an acute inflammatory condition of the kidney, which if it's resolved, it may not cause long-term damage. Sort of like what Chris Bumstead experiences. Right. So the doctor should be like, immediately if they see that, they should research and find out what's his inflammation levels in his body with a C-reactive protein or fibrinogen. Check the other kidney metrics. They should do an ultrasound. If they're not doing that, he should switch places. Does he live in Massachusetts?
Yeah.
Because you guys have the best hospitals in the world there. You have Mass General. Yeah, he should go to Mass General. He should just go to Mass General and get himself a nephrologist.
Yeah, he's got some great connections here. There's a guy in the area named Dr. Harrison Pope. He did a massive study for Harvard University, and he tested all of us local guys that are over 35. He wanted to test the effects of steroids on men over 35. Mm-hmm. So we were all able to maintain a relationship with him. And he reached out to him, and that guy sent him to someone else. And he said the guy's great, but, this was just recent. He doesn't know, he really wanted me to ask you if you had any good advice, which that was very helpful. I'm sure he hasn't done all of those things yet, and he will.
He probably won't come across the SGLT2 inhibitors quickly. They'll tell him about blood pressure medication, so that could be an advantage. But as you know, Jose, unfortunately, the kidneys, it's like a lifetime disease. Everybody's kidneys fail if they live long enough. So that's going to happen to everybody. Happens to men faster. Happens faster if you have high blood pressure or dehydration. And it happens quicker if you're more masculine. So it's a disease of masculinity, really. But anyway, Jose, I got to thank you so much for spending your time with me. I know I took a lot of your time in the morning. It was a great pleasure to talk to you. I hope maybe I could have you on again sometime with somebody else to keep you involved in YouTube, since you don't make your own videos.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me. And It's been a great conversation. I look forward to doing it again sometime.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you, Jose. And if your friend needs to reach out, you can just send me a message. I'll be sure to respond to him. I'll send you a text.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Talk soon. Bye-bye.